Hello, and welcome to another episode of COG, a podcast by Compliance Creep, where we explore why we learn, why we don't, and what makes the difference. And today I'm joined by Swati Sharma, who, in full disclosure, is also my fiance. Say hi, Swati.
Hi, everybody.
And we're going to look at that middle part of it, why people don't learn or why they're resistant to change. And Swati is a trained REBT therapist. So you might be asking, what does therapy have to do with training? But of course, actually, you wouldn't be asking that because any trainer knows the answer to that. But fundamentally, what are we doing when we're training? We're trying to get somebody to change a behavior, which is very similar to what therapists do. So, to get started, Swati, can you tell us what is REBT therapy?
REBT stands for Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy, and that's just an advanced, specialized form of cognitive behavioral therapy. Of course, it falls under the behavioral sciences, and it strongly believes in using our own thoughts to work on some unhealthy belief systems that we might be holding within ourselves, and which might be causing various kinds of disturbances and mental blocks.
Why are people inherently, it seems like they're inherently resistant to change?
Change in itself is an unnerving thing for us as people, um, because we find certainty and predictability empowering, and therefore fairly safe. And even if the change that we are talking about is not necessarily something towards the negative, we would be a little anxious because of the element of the unknown and what it might do in terms of impacting our comfort levels. So, the entire conversation is around discomfort in adjusting to a new state of affairs.
So you're saying it's sort of a safety thing. I guess it also doesn't depend on the nature of the change, or because I think the type of change that you're going for, or that you see a lot, right, are people that recognize that they have an issue, right? Because they have to reach out to you to start
Yes.
with. They
Yeah.
say, I think one of the challenges from a training perspective, again, is they're not coming saying that, yeah, I have a problem. I know I have a problem. And in training, we call this a burning platform.
Hmm.
We also call it the WIFM, which is kind of a funny sounding. It's an acronym for what's in it for me, right? So it's a matter of selling, in a way, the need for change. Now, I know a little bit about the therapeutic process, but correct me if I'm wrong. But tell me about agenda setting. Do you think that in a way is kind of answering what's in it for me, or is that different? Do I have that wrong?
Agenda setting is actually a little different because when we are talking about resistance in therapy, that's kind of more at a subconscious level where a person might come looking for resolution to his or her emotional challenges, but might not be quite ready to let go of them or let go of the reasons why he or she is having them in the first place. And therefore, acceptance becomes a really critical element where we look at a person who would resist um, an emotional challenge or an emotional disturbance because it is part and parcel of his or her identity or being, and allow the person to understand the humanness and the okayness of that issue so that you can move ahead of that and start solving the problem.
I think you said something very key there. And I think this kind of sorts out the type of change, right? When you said that it is key to their sense of being, right? Is key to their identity. So I'm thinking that the types of change that like a trainer may ask for probably doesn't go along those lines. Although when we do go into diversity and inclusion, I remember, oh man, this was about 20 years ago,
Mm.
and they I was at a company, and they had sent out a suggested reading on inclusion and diversity. They sent out a reading list, and this one guy, I almost want to say his name.
Don't.
Yeah, but he had a name. He had a name that was perfect for this. I want to say it so badly because his last name was, anyway. So he sent. I remember this. He sent a corporate-wide email saying that homosexuality is not inclusiveness. Would you be inclusive for child molesters? Like, and now today that is very shocking, but that was even
Yeah.
shocking 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And I remember I went to as a response, the company brought in an advisor. It's so different, but it's beautiful the way society's changed, because I'm just thinking back there, and this guy who was facilitating this
Mm.
came out
Hmm.
in during the session as being homosexual,
Wow.
and he was shaking as he was saying it. It was such a beautiful moment, and I went to it basically with a bag of popcorn just to see how this fellow was going to
Respond.
handle it. Yeah, but that was something where this bit of change
Mm.
went into. He had a model for himself. Um, uh, Certain behaviors and attitudes and everything else like that.
Mm.
And I think on that particular subject, I think society has moved ahead leaps and bounds from there. So it took a while to get there. But tell me, and I know there's a specific technique, and it's not agenda setting, but what part of the process do you um, kind of analyze what you're getting from a behavior? Say somebody who has OCD,
Hmm.
right, and they have to touch a doorknob, say, so many times a day.
Right.
Like, how do you get them to realize that that might not be beneficial for them?
Right. So, like you might be aware, since you know a little bit about therapy, also that OCD is an offshoot, a very specialized offshoot of anxiety. So, the need to touch a doorknob does not come with a very relaxed, composure. It comes with a lot of obsessive thoughts around what would happen if you do not touch the doorknob a certain number of times or check the lock for a certain number of times. So there's a lot of catastrophical thinking behind it, and picturing, creating, and envisioning, picturing really bad scenarios that might happen. Say, for instance, your house would get robbed, or if you're talking about cleaning the doorknob, then, for instance, you're going to get infected and you're going to die. So, it's because of these terrible, scary thoughts, and thoughts which seem to come with such a kind of weight and credibility that they form a very believable structure in the mind of this person, and therefore the person is resorting to some kind of compulsive actions because that makes him or her believe that he can avert a threatening situation or dangerous eventuality through that.
Mm. So how do you decouple them from that action, from those thoughts that doing this will keep me safe?
One of the most unloved and unpopular techniques, not by the therapist but by clients, is exposure, and exposure and response prevention is the most effective way of helping a person with an OCD kind of challenge. And of course, exposure and response prevention in itself focuses more on enabling the person to resist responding to the obsessive thought with the compulsion, with the temptation to do something about it with their compulsive behaviors, and to resist those behaviors while having those thoughts. So, if they feel like cleaning something or checking something because of the eventuality, because of the worry that they have in their mind, the ERP focuses on resisting that. So, that done
I'm sorry. What is ERP?
exposure and response prevention.
Okay, thanks.
Right. So the response prevention part is what I've explained, and the exposure part of it becomes, exposing them to the worst case scenario related thoughts. In case your thoughts, obsessive thoughts, are more about getting infected, then you would be exposed to crowds or a place where you think that the risk of infection is higher, or if you're talking about
Although I don't think that's a great example
for
for
not
for
for
these
now,
days.
not for now, not for now.
Yeah, kids, stay at home and wear a mask.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this later, we are in the midst of the pandemic, which I'm sure you've heard about.
Heard about, right?
Huh. And it's interesting though, because I'm thinking about that, and luckily I don't have OCD, but there's one thing that I do, so I could understand it just slightly. But then I think, oh, it does no harm. Like, and I picked this up in college, which is when you drive through a yellow light. That you now this is for listeners at home. Swati is in India right now, and the roads are very different. Yellow lights, I think, just run away in fear in India. But uh, so yellow light means it's soon to be red. So I kissed my hand and then kissed the sky, and it's just something I saw somebody do in college, and I thought it was kind of cool, as a thing of good luck and safety and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking we're going a little bit far afield here, though it's really really interesting. So what I'm saying is like, so the types of change that like in corporate training or things like that we want to achieve seem. Do you think they're very different from the types of things, or do you think the process is different from the type of things that you would address in a therapy session?
Yes, it is kind of different, but it is also a line of similarity because when you talk about therapy and we're talking about change or resistance there too, we're talking about a really subconscious aspect of it, unless of course somebody else dragged your ass to the therapy. Right. So, like I said, the resistance in therapy is more about, you know, saying, no, I am not that kind of a person, or no, I am not ready to make a change within myself when it comes to my issues and work upon them, or saying that I hate the way I am being right now. But the more you hate the way you are being right now, the more you dig your heels into the suffering that you are experiencing. I see a line of similarity when I look at training in an organizational setup where somebody is really uh, given you the sense that you are somehow inadequate, which is the same sense
Mm.
that a client gets that oh god, this part of me is inadequate, this part of me is not good, and I want to get rid of it. And something
Like it,
like
like in a review, like in a
Mhm.
performance review.
Right.
Is that what you mean?
Right. And then you are like, you stand tall and you pull yourself up and you dig your heels in and you're like, why would you think I need to be trained? Why would you think that there's something that I lack or I need to change within
Mm.
myself? So anytime, any age, any person, if you approach them and talk about them needing to change, they are going to be a little disturbed about it on two levels. Change in itself is not a very comforting thing, and secondly, it's going to give them the sense that something is not okay about them, and that in itself develops resistance.
Another aspect to that, and tell me if you think I have a point here. So in a situation such as a performance review,
Mhm.
it's I mean, I've been mixed. Like, but lately I've had really good bosses, so we were all on the same page and everything else like that.
Thank
But
God.
when yeah, but when you think about performance reviews, it's an inherently frightening situation because there's a built-in power imbalance. I mean, you're speaking to somebody and they have the ability to hurt you, right?
Hmm.
Hurt you financially, hurt your career. Um, so especially when they're saying something's deficient in you,
Right.
uh, I think we go into a little bit of a fight or flight reaction sometimes, depending on the environment. What do you think?
Exactly. Exactly. I totally agree with that. Is a fight, flight, or freeze response is very classically part of a performance review experience. And I wonder if there's anybody among us who has not had a stressful experience during that time, at one time or the other. So, yes, I totally agree with that. And
But on the other hand, and I'm thinking of with my last, say, two bosses that I've had, and I've also conducted reviews, right? And I think, and I'm trying to think of some key things, and tell me how this fits into the paradigm of therapy or getting somebody into change.
hmm,
So never, like, this is a rule of thumb that I learned from good supervisors. The person should never be surprised, right? So when I do a performance review,
right,
uh, a lot of times I ask them first, although maybe there's a better way of doing this, but I ask them first and, like, kind of like, how would you sort of rate your performance,
right,
and what do you think is going on? And I really try to get them, and when I've done that, it has never happened where they've been off base. I've never had somebody say, "Nothing. I'm perfect in every way. There's absolutely nothing that I need to change."
right.
Because to me, if you ask somebody, "Well, what do you think about that? What have you noticed? How can I help you be more successful? Because your success is my success."
Right. That's why I feel that the approach that development gives, the development part of training is so much more promising, because when you're bringing this training aspect from a place where you say that you have so much more to offer, because you have grown, and
Mhm.
if that growth is tracked, if that growth is so it's not just a verbal conversation, oh look how you have grown in this organization on this role, but it's more of something that you track over time. Like what you were telling me about how you prefer to do performance reviews reminded me of one of the best experiences I had in performance review, which was with one of the bosses who loved technology. I am giggling because I remember he sat nights to develop a system which took us from goal setting all the way to our final rating.
Mhm.
And there was no room for conversation, because we were the one entering our numbers of what we had done for the day, what we had achieved, and everything was so beautifully quantified. Even, and I am talking about the times when I was in human resources, which is not always easy to quantify, as you know. And quantifying every single thing and talking about the numbers on a regular basis, um, showing
Let
showing
me
how,
just pick that up
yes.
for a second. No, I like that a lot, but I don't think it would work for every situation. But let me tell you what I like about it. What I'm hearing on that. One of the things. So
Hmm.
it's and the conversation I think is going into a great area, which is in the performance reviews. But one of the things that is so fraught by that is in so many organizations that seems like a black box. Like you don't know what other people are saying. You don't know, sometimes if you don't know the criteria by which you're being judged. But I think in that, it seems like there was transparency. So you knew exactly the measure, right? And you knew where other people were against that
Exactly,
measure. Right?
exactly. That's what I was driving towards. That, the entire exercise, because it was so linear and it was so logically, pursuing a line of, development. We could not only see where we hadn't met certain numbers, but we could also see how we had, developed potential capabilities. Even that portion was something that we did not want. We did not need a senior, a boss to come, and a manager to come and point out to us, okay, look, we think that you are going to do better here, or you might need training in that. Because it was all us. It would also reach a point where we would be able to identify the training needs that we would have to make us even better. I like
That
that
is
system.
beautiful. Yeah, I love that system. I think that's really neat. And oh, I just had a thought. What was I going to say? Oh, this is it. This is it. This is it. Okay, so I love that system for a number of ways because in anything, especially in a team, and especially in a boss employee type relationship,
Hmm.
I think if you can get to a point of co-creation, and this is what I mean, right?
Right.
I don't have all the answers, right? It depends on, especially because, well, some people like micromanagers, but I don't. And the further the person is away from your daily job, they may give you a development task
Hmm.
and they might have no idea how to execute that. They don't know you, perhaps,
Yes.
they don't know maybe what you need, which again is what makes things. So if things a little bit fraught, because if you're sent out to a training program that you don't think is relevant to you
Hmm.
and is of no help, right? uh, you're not going to learn anything, and you're just going to be resistant to it, and it's going to be terrible.
Hmm.
But if you know the criteria, and again that co-creation thing where you ask them, what do you think might be able to help you do this? What would you think about this? And I'll tell you why I'm saying it. And just not dictate, but develop together.
Hmm. Yes, yes. In fact, most interesting is, I suddenly had this thought while you were speaking that, I would say, training events which involved, the more the involvement of the person. Like today, we've spent so much time talking about how to bring the need for change and the volition for having a training change done on someone from the person. And taking that conversation ahead, my memories of really successful training programs have been where there was a lot of forthcoming volition from the people, where there was a need which was strongly felt. You really knew where the pinch was coming, and you were really hungry to resolve that pinch. Where the trainer would be very responsive to how the person wanted to be trained, and
Hmm.
also very sensitive to different changes in the way the audience was receiving the training, and quickly adapt the mode of training, or the medium, or even sometimes the facilitator. Yes,
Hmm.
that was one of the most interesting experiences I had, because it also brought the element of the unexpected. There were so many different ways. Even went into storytelling, and then suddenly we were into a role play, and it was all extempore based on how the day was progressing.
Too, because I think about the trainings that I've conducted and also the trainings I received. And one that I kept thinking of during this whole podcast was I did one in executive presence, right? Because I can be informal, and it's my
Mhm.
personality type. Um, So that so so I don't always sound like an executive, nor do I want to. So you had there like somebody who doesn't. Okay, so this was a good example, right? Because I didn't think I needed change. Right?
Right.
I didn't think I needed help with public speaking because I've never had a hesitation to do it, good, bad, or ugly, right?
Right.
As I'm doing this podcast, right? Um, but yet it became one of my favorite training sessions because I had an epiphany in it and about an issue that I didn't realize I had.
Wow.
And that was defensiveness, right? So I was, I gave a speech on something, and you get feedback from the crowd there, and they were saying this and that. I don't remember exactly what they said, but I remember feeling my blood pressure rise. I remember feeling attacked. I remember feeling, and then I said, "Ah, this is my
Hmm.
problem.
Hmm. 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 Hmm.
I don't think that I'm bad at public speaking. Well, I mean, our listeners could differ on that, and that's fine. But I'm not good at taking criticism. I'm not good at accepting feedback.
Hmm.
This is my area, and it's still something that I'm working on. Being my fiance, you can attest to that.
Yeah.
Uh,
I was about to chip in with did it help?
I guess not, but at least I'm aware of it.
Are you?
Okay, maybe not.
Can
Well,
I
then
say
now
I love you?
this is oh, I love you too, baby. Now this is going to devolve into couples therapy.
Don't they all?
But it's a couple things there, and I'm trying to think about what made the difference. And you were talking about the facilitator, and the facilitator in this one was really good, and it gave me a safe place to realize, like I wasn't on because the whole environment I wasn't on the defensive. I was only on the defensive there, and that's where it got me. I was like, ah, okay. And I have, well, you didn't know me then, so
Right.
I I can say without you knowing whether it's true or not that I have improved.
I'm sure you have.
Okay, so let's kind of look back on some of the things that we've talked about here and some takeaways that people can apply.
Right.
Okay, so we said that what's needed for change is a burning platform or some realization that with them, what's in it for me,
Hmm.
some realization that the change will be beneficial.
Hmm.
Is that right?
Hmm. Yes.
And I'm wondering, and so in therapy, you said you do that through
Agenda setting.
agenda setting. It is. So that is agenda setting. Okay. Where you look at what you want to change and why you want to change it, and how your current state of affairs or current beliefs are not meeting your needs.
Right. And also not to reject the current belief, but also understand that was part of our growth process.
Mm, that's a good one too. So you're to validate. Say for me, when I was getting feedback on my public speaking, they weren't saying you suck at public speaking, although they might be thinking that.
Hmm.
But no, they really weren't. They were trying to be helpful because I think of my mindset as I'm watching somebody or giving feedback. I want the person to be successful.
Right.
So another thing is, I think uh, we talked a bit about is creating a safe environment for change to happen, right? Because initially, you said that people are resistant to change, right? Because it's the unknown,
Right.
and they may not feel safe training. Would that be fair?
Right. Yes. Very, very interesting part that you have brought up now.
So creating a place where you can
Yes.
fail, where the other people are not saying you're deficient, but you can grow better. And what do you think about, and how does this relate to the therapeutic relationship or the relationship between a therapist and a client, the co-creator?
Hmm. Um, That's a tricky one because that's something that everybody in the therapy world says that we need to be very careful about and aware of. But that's the one that kind of creeps in very insidiously in terms of how transference can work in therapeutic relationships with
I'm
clients.
sorry, what is transference?
Transference is when you kind of start relating to either your therapist or your client. It's transference and counter transference. You start relating to your therapist or your client as another significant person who you've had experience with, say, for instance, your mother or some old friend that you had who you felt safe with. So, some mannerisms or some behaviors or some even the way the person looks or even the way the person gives you listening space, whatever it might be, kind of starts making you relate to the person in another kind of with another person, so that your relationship, therapeutic relationship, kind of gets contaminated, if I might use that word very loosely. So
And performance reviews are such situations where you're looking for feedback from your employee as well. How is that
no, that's
analogous
yeah,
to
in
transference?
fact, that's actually on the other side of transference because that would mean that you are actually trying to build something which is of an equal relationship, like a team interaction, where hierarchy is not present. So within that room, within that interaction of the performance review, when you're asking for feedback, you're actually negating hierarchy, whereas transference would kind of motivate hierarchy to be present, because if you're going to associate your therapist as she reminds me of my daughter, or I start feeling the kind of vibes and connections that I felt with my daughter or with a significant other from the past or from the present also, so that's kind of creating a hierarchy over there, and it's interfering with the neutrality of the relationship that a therapeutic relationship always aims for. Whereas when you're talking about feedback in a performance review, you are actually encouraging neutrality of hierarchy, a hierarchy which very well exists with structure and tangibility in an organization. You're actually negating that and saying that let's talk as equals. So
Yes, yes.
mm,
So let me just relate this to what we said before. So we're saying some of the things that are an impetus for people to change. One is they need to see that there's a reason. So some of the things we were saying, people need a reason to change,
mhm,
and the other thing that we were saying is a safe environment. And I think part of that is that equal footing, negating hierarchy, right?
mm,
To make the training development kind of buy-in on both parties.
right.
Did I interpret that correctly?
Right, right.
Now, so the last thing I want to talk about is sustainment. So, and in some previous episodes, we talked about this, or I talked about this, because corporate training, especially, is kind of like a once and done, right? And there's not really an environment where and that's why you lose most things
Yes.
uh, there. So in therapy, how do you sustain gains somebody receives?
The sustaining happens only when there is a larger change. So I don't know how to relate that to training you. So maybe you could
You
find
don't have
a
to.
comparison. Uh, when we are looking for a larger change, we mean in terms of whether we are actually making a quick fix with this funny, cock gun kind of thing, where you're just looking at the gaps and you're trying to fill the gaps, and then you say, okay, now you're good to go. or you're creating change at a deeper level where it actually changes the approach. As far as therapy goes, the change will be to the approach of life, approach of how you perceive incidents that happen around you, changing how you remember them, changing how you understand and interpret them, and changing how you think around them, and therefore also bringing an overall change to your internal environment. That would be, a philosophical level change, and that would be more sustainable.
And it actually relates perfectly to the last episode where I was speaking with Alan Greatorex about the difference between awareness training and mastery. And
Right.
we kind of struggled with the question of what's needed for the type of skill, right? So here, and I think you delineated this really nicely, that a quick fix, right? You need to know how to tie your shoe. Right? Once you learn how to tie your shoe, you tying your shoe then for the rest of your life.
Right.
It's something that you just then do.
Right.
But when it comes to deeper level train changes, and this I think is especially true with ethics training or diversity training or things where you're actually changing your paradigm. So it's a different domain of learning. And to go back to college when we learned about different domains of learning, this is definitely a deeper domain of learning. More again that relates to your sense of self, what makes yourself
Hmm.
up. And also, that's the scariest type of thing to change because they do have an impact.
True.
All right. I'm sorry. Did you have any final thoughts? Oh, you know what I should say? You know what we
Yes.
should say? Yes. Um, because we're an official podcast, so we may as well promote your services. If you
The
want to
one
find
thing
out
I
more,
always forget.
yeah. If you want to find out more about Swati and her practice, please go to mindscapestherapy.com. And she offers online and, well, right now it's exclusively online because of, COVID. But so you can set up an online consultation with her. Any final
Yes.
thoughts?
This conversation has actually created a ground for newer thoughts for me as well. Some stuff to contemplate about. And in an organizational environment, it I have the question to contemplate on how this actually translates into reality. Considering the pressures that the training department faces, and maybe that's a
Hmm.
larger conversation for another podcast.
Well, and actually, part of that was answered in last week's episode. Again, because we're looking at how is mastery then sustained, and this would go for how is that deeper level, that domain of knowledge, where it's talking about ethics and values and things like that, and how is that sustained? Or management style. That's another one where you want like a mastery, you want a deeper level. How is that sustained? And the model that Alan and I were talking about was from a program that we worked on together, where the training lasted over a year, where you would get back, you had an online community, you had initial training for 2 or 3 days,
Yeah,
and then once a month you would talk to people. So that's another aspect of it, the social aspect of it, which is huge, right? And I
yeah.
think too that's why in recovery programs like for addiction and things like that, that sustaining is getting together with a group of people who have the same paradigm now and are working on that paradigm. I think that's also why people get together with people that follow the same philosophy or religion,
Yes,
right?
I love that
And,
idea, by the way.
oh, thank you. And you do that too when you work with coworkers and mentors and pass ideas around, and you're always reinforcing and reinterpreting how best to use rational emotive behavioral therapy.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Thank you, Jeff.
Um,
I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm really happy to be on this show.
I'm very happy you came, and I love you.
I love you. Bye
All
bye.
right.
Bye bye,
Bye.
everybody. I love you all.
We're full of love. So long.